Well, Jim, let's get away from your mother-in-law and let's get to...
That's what I'm trying to do.
Before we get to Raw, which more than likely because of the extra pay-per-view review here this week on the show, we won't get to any questions. It'll probably be Raw, but some classic wrestling before we get there. I have here a file, Jim, from the files.
Yes.
This is a file from the Wrestling News Archive, which comprises the various correspondence and photos of Norm Kietzer, Pro Wrestling Enterprises, Wrestling Review, The Rings Wrestling, Wrestling Monthly, Major League Wrestling. What am I forgetting? There's a whole bunch of other publications, too.
Yes.
This is one of the big files in here, the Pat Malone file.
Oh, my God.
And
because I swear to you, I am working on writing in my spare time, a piece on Pat Malone.
Oh.
This is very surreptitious.
Is this for Time Magazine?
No, it's actually, it's for Look. Look is coming back. For something that I'm working on, I was writing some passages on Pat Malone, and I was thinking, I'm going to run this by Brian before I show it to anybody and see what he thinks of it once I'm finished with it. And here you are with a full file on the man.
Well, there's multiple parts of this file. There are 2 different files of photos going back to seemingly the beginning of his career. And then him as an old man backstage at the shows. There's a picture of him and Roy Welch, picture of him and Norm Kietzer. This is the correspondence file I have here.
And are there any pictures of him as the Green Shadow?
I believe so, but I can go back and check.
Because, not only do I want to see him, and we'll do that off the air, but also Scott Teal in his research. The Green Shadow was so mysterious. And folks, the reason why I'm writing a piece about him was he was one of the, and I think we mentioned it on the show, one of the biggest draws in the history of wrestling that absolutely nobody talks about or remembers, and that's sad. But Scott Teal, when he's researched his Nashville book and Knoxville book, there are very few publicity pictures or any kind of pictures of Pat Malone as the Green Shadow still existing. But we didn't account for your files that you have curated there that have been around since the 1960s.
Well, I'll see what I have. Again, there's a lot of stuff here, and this is one of the big files and a lot of correspondence. Here's a...
Because, of course, Pat, as we've talked about in later years, was responsible for selling the magazines, the wrestling news, and the arenas around the Tennessee territory, including getting the little kids, hey, boy, come here. Sell 10 of these magazines. You can get in and watch the matches.
Yeah, and I have here, this is a letter from Pat Malone, typed to Norm Kietzer, November 10th, 1976. Please find enclosed a cashier check in the amount of $500, half of the amount I owe you. I will send you the balance, which is $500, in a few days. I want to thank you, I think he means thank, for the copy of the letter. I don't think it will create any problems for me. I will call you soon. Go ahead and get ready for me. The 2,500 magazines, issue number 39. Thank you for everything. Sincerely yours, Pat Malone. And I guess he would be... I have a letter. I have 2.
Yeah, and if I recall, because the Wrestling News was the magazine, as we talked about, that was sold in the arenas back at that time. When I started going, I think the first issue I got was like issue number 30. Maybe it might have been the late 20s, early 30s. And that was in spring of 1974. So around that time, that may be right about the time that he started using some of my pictures also. But he was getting 2,500 of the magazines that he could sell around the territory. And I believe the price at that time was, I want to say $2, but maybe it was $1, but I think it was $2.
And it's coming on the heels of this, a letter from Norm Kietzer to Pat Malone, November 5th, 1976, to Pat Malone, Ezel Road in Nashville. Dear Pat, Mr. Nick Goulas called me yesterday, and he was unhappy about issue number 38 of the Wrestling News. He said that Armstrong and Fuller had left the area, and Diamond was not important enough for a cover. and also that Don Green had left the area and was working opposition to him, and that he didn't like having any photos of Green.
Hold on, because the diamond he's talking about was Buddy Diamond, who was I remember this magazine, who had just done a deal where he was becoming the private in Jerry Lawler's, the General's Army, Lawler's Army. And Fuller and Bob Armstrong had indeed left and gone back to Knoxville. And Don Green was working for the company that Luthez had spearheaded with, who was it at the time? Was it Buddy Lee or was it Danny Davis? Not my Danny Davis, but the Nashville Danny Davis that was back in the UWA in 1976.
Yeah, that's 76. Yeah.
Yeah. So he featured all these guys that fucking Nick was on the outs with for some reason or another.
Anyway, to make a long story short, he wants me to check out with him who goes on the cover each time from now on. Also, he said either I or you should check out with him any stories about his area I put in. I covered all he wanted in a long letter I wrote back to him. I've enclosed a copy for your information only. He wants me to use a photo he is sending me of Tojo Yamamoto, George Goulas, Jarrett, and Jackie Fargo on the front cover of number 39. And
that color picture that he had Mike Shields take, I believe, at the TV studio in Nashville, they actually, right as I was getting started taking pictures, all the other stuff was 8x10 black and white, and sometimes not even on photo paper, just printed. But this one was printed like real cardstock and in full color of Nick's 4 stars: Jarrett, Tojo Yamamoto, Jackie Fargo, and George Goulas. And they had that at every merchandise stand. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And to use the one you sent me of Tommy Rich on the back cover. Since Mr. Goulas is the boss, I will go along with what he says and check out all the stories with him from now on. I don't think this system will be hard to live with, and I hope you think the same. I did want you to know what happened on this, so I sent you this letter and a copy of what I wrote back to him. Let me know if this will create any problems for you or anything. I think everything can work out okay, and I can satisfy him and give you a good magazine to sell. So, issues from the office.
And also the picture of Tommy Rich, as I recall from the back. See, a lot of these pictures were Mike Shields was taking them, because Mike Shields at the time would take pose still pictures back in the Mid-South Coliseum locker rooms, and then he was doing the film camera for the matches. And as I said, I was just starting in Louisville to take pictures at the other end of the territory. But Pat would just get pictures and send them in, and Norm Keitzer, as we've talked about, would credit photo by Pat Malone. He never picked up a camera in his life. But that was Pat's interest in, and here's the kicker: 6 months, not even after this letter, Jarrett and Goulas would split, and Pat went with Jarrett. And because Pat and Roy Welch had been close friends since the 1920s, and they were intertwined with training the Wrestling Bears. And Roy Welch, when he established the booking office, he's the one that made Pat Malone the Green Shadow, and Pat Malone put Nashville on the wrestling map for Roy, and Knoxville. He did incredible business, and Birmingham. So the loyalty was with Pat and Roy. When Jarrett split off from Goulas, Pat still came to Louisville and still went to Memphis. He just stopped going to Nashville because Nick kept Nashville. And because Teeny had been in the office with Nick and Roy, and Jerry had been Roy's protege, Pat felt more loyalty to them rather than Nick, who was not always well liked by everybody.
Nick, who didn't like the photos he was sending into the magazines.
Yeah, Pat didn't have to worry about what Nick thought. And then I don't know whether Nick was selling many copies of the Wrestling News in Nashville, Chattanooga, and Birmingham, because that's all he had left, and he wouldn't have those for 2 more years.
Well, Jim, the next letter I have here, correspondence, this is from Norm Keitzer to Pat Malone, dated December 20th, 1976. Dear Pat, I received your check for $500, which pays for what you owed on number 38. Thank you. For number 39, I still have not located the 400 copies that were lost by my printer, but will keep looking for them. If I find them, I will send them immediately. But for right now, your bill stands at $840 for 2,100 copies of the Wrestling News number 39, NWA East Edition, at 40 cents each. I have the 2 slides you sent me. I'll have to get prints and negatives made from them. In the future, please send me color negatives rather than color slides, as they work much better. Just use, not knowing that he didn't take any of these photos, it's funny to me.
Yeah.
Just use color negative film rather than color slide film.
And see, that's because in that era of printing, to make the color separations, they like negatives, but I couldn't send him any of my negatives because I goddamn needed them to, print the pictures here, so they had to deal with it.
Now, as far as Knoxville is concerned, I got a call from Mr. Dick Steinborn, who I met while there. He wrestles there, and he also handles the programs sold at the matches for the area. He was interested in selling magazines for me. I told him you are the exclusive distributor for magazines for that area, and that any deal would have to go through you. I know that you sold some magazines to the ring many who stopped to see you. I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to say there.
The ring man who stopped.
Oh, the ring
you.
man.
I bet you.
Oh, you know what? It's crossed out after that. I thought it was a Y. Who's the ring man?
Well, whoever was hauling the ring. See, here's the thing. Pat never went to Knoxville in the modern era to sell magazines. That wasn't part of really either of Jarrett's territory or Nick and Roy's territory. Remember, Kazana ran it till 1974. Ron Fuller bought it and opened up Southeastern Wrestling. And since this is a couple of years later, Dick Steinborn at the time was wrestling as, I think, Mr. Wrestling, or was he the gladiator under a mask at that point? But also he was a photographer, was shooting some of the pictures and helping Les Thatcher with the programs and things while Les was doing the TV show. So they were probably wanting to sell some of the magazines, same thing. But I bet you whoever was hauling the ring, was it Mac McMurray, the referee who was partners with Ron, or somebody had stopped in to see Pat if they were going through Nashville. Maybe, hey, let me take some of those and sell them or whatever. And he sold them to something like that.
All right, well, back to this. The ring man who stopped to see you. Maybe it might be possible for you to make some sort of deal with Steinborn. I know he does all the programs and handles that end of the business, as Ron Fuller told me this. He might be able to put the magazine on sale using the same people he uses to sell the program. What I couldn't give him was a price for the magazine. Why don't you offer him the same price you sold those other magazines for if you are interested? This might be a way to get more sales up there and have the magazine on sale there all of the time, and yet save you from having to make the drive down there.
See, that's the thing. I think Norm is confused about the geography of the state of Tennessee and what territory was what. And he was thinking because Pat was exclusive for the Tennessee territory, he didn't realize that there was 2 already and fixed to be 3 different territories in the state of Tennessee.
If you are interested in this, Mr. Steinborn's telephone number is, and he has 2 different phone numbers listed here. I'm not sure, as I wrote it down twice and they were different. Also, I had an idea which might help sales up there and also give Nick Goulas what he wants. To explain my idea, I've enclosed a copy of another edition of the Wrestling News called the Stranglehold Edition. If you will notice, we use the same covers for the Stranglehold Edition as we do for the AWA Edition. Look inside the back cover of the magazine enclosed, and you will see this. We just fold the cover the opposite way so that each area gets someone from there on the front. In that way, we could use the same magazine and covers for the Nashville and Knoxville areas, but staple the magazines the opposite way so that each area had their man on front.
and also with these different editions, they had NWA East, NWA West, Stranglehold for the WWA in Indianapolis, AWA edition. The first, when you print a magazine, it's stapled in the middle. So the first 8 sheets, 16 pages on each side would be the same thing. And then they would insert new copy just for that specific edition of the magazine for the pages in the middle, and then staple it like that. Yeah, they reused a lot of shit. He was a master at cost cutting, was Norm Keitzer.
This is all just ideas, and maybe you don't think it is worthwhile. However, I think it might work out. If you want to contact Mr. Steinborn and work out a deal with him on the wrestling news, you can. If not, just forget it. I gave you the deal, so do what you want.
So do what you want.
I guess that covers it for now. I'll be planning out the next issue soon. We'll call Mr. Goulas about what he wants on the front cover and go from there. Thanks, Norm. And I have seemingly the reply from Pat Malone, again typed December 22nd, 1976. Dear Norman, I just received your letter and magazine. Enclosed, please find a cashier check in the amount of $500 on issue 39. At this time, I will have a balance of $340 that I owe, and I will send as soon as possible. As far as the Knoxville side, I intended to go there and have a talk with Mr. Dick Steinborn and Fuller, but they change every few weeks of who is in charge. As you might not know, they have a new booker or a man in charge every few weeks. That makes it hard for me to do business with any one person. But I intend to go over there. We'll call you in a few days. We wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you for everything. Sincerely yours, Pat Malone.
And 2 questions. And number 1, I wonder who the revolving door of bookers was at that point in time.
This is 70.
Were they going back and forth between?
Yeah.
Well, Dick Steinborn, Bob Armstrong, Robert Fuller at that point.
Ron Fuller himself.
Ron. But the second thing is that hand signed Pat Malone?
Yes, it is.
Does it look like kind of neat handwriting?
It does.
Okay, that's his wife Sammy is typing it for him. And I'm not like Pat was an invalid, but he didn't give a shit to sit down at a fucking typewriter. This is a goddamn old shooter that used to fucking carry a knife in his boot to fend off the fucking fans that were trying to attack him. His fucking knuckles and the calcium deposits were like golf balls. He wasn't sitting down at a typewriter sending Christmas greetings to Norm Keitzer when he was 77 years old. His wife Sammy was typing that.
They even typed out the envelopes, because I have the envelope here, post-dated December 22nd, 76, Nashville, Tennessee, to Mr. Norm Keitzer, Medelia, Minnesota. And then in red, it's typed out, attention, important. Make sure it gets to the right department there. You got me actually interested. I'm just going to go a little forward just to see if there is anything about the fallout with Goulas that I can find.
Anything from late April, early May, 1977. And by the way, here's another, while you're looking at that, another little factoid that I've come up with. And one of these days we'll talk about why I've been doing this research. But Pat Malone, as the Green Shadow, was responsible as the top heel for popping the wrestling business in Nashville in 1940 and 41, when Roy Welch had first taken over and established a booking office there. And in those days, they had the matches at the old Hippodrome, which was they had no sports arena in Nashville. The Hippodrome was a big roller skating rink with permanent bleacher seats, and they had concerts, they had political conventions and rallies, any kind of live entertainment. That was the place that indoors you went in Nashville in those days. And if they were selling and jamming what we believe, Scott Teal has tried to investigate this, and I've heard Christine Jarrett talk about it, but the building supposedly could seat about 2,000 people, but if everybody was standing and they would do this all the time, you could get almost 3,000 people in this thing. And their tickets were like an average of a little bit less than $1. But if you use the old time promoters formula, and there were 6 guys on these cards, and Pat Malone was in the main event, and he was either wrestling the booker or the booker's brother, the head of the office. He was best friends. He was figured in. He had a run there of years. If they drew a $2,500 house and you use the old time promoters formula that Sam Muchnick used to use, you can see Pat Malone, this is where I'm going with this, getting payoffs in 1941 out of the Nashville Hippodrome. And $200 in fucking today's money equals like $4,000. So these old fucking shooters set this office up, and Roy kept it between himself and his brother Herb and Wild Bill Caney and Tex Riley and a few of the other Tennessee mainstays for the next 15, 20 years. And these guys were making what even today in the wrestling business would be considered legitimate money of the equivalent of thousands of dollars a week. It was a fucking amazing. If you go back and look at this that far, what they were able to do with no television, no interstates, and in the middle of the Depression and World War II. But bring us back to 1977.
Yeah, let's go to here. We'll hit on a few things. It may be slightly out of order because this is a massive file of paperwork, and some of this in this area seems to be, it's all there, but out of order chronological, in the chronological sense, I guess. Here's a letter from Norm Keitzer to Pat Malone, February 16th, 77. Nice talking to you on the phone today. Hope that you are feeling well and your health is good in the future. I'm sorry that issue number 40 was delayed, but I wrote Mrs. Jarrett a note and asked her to decide who they want on the cover for issue 41 by March 1st, and if they want someone other than Lawler, to decide by then, so that I can then get the next issue out on schedule. I've already received some color stuff from Dick Steinborn of Boys in the Southeastern area, so we should have no problems there. I'm shipping you this week $1,000 for 2,500 copies of number 40, the Wrestling News NWA East Edition, at 40 cents each. I guess that covers everything right now. Hope the magazines arrive quickly.
Son of a bitch, about 5 years later, he was charging me about 80 cents for my magazines.
Here's another one from Norm on March 2nd, 77. Just a note to let you know that Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Golden will be on the front cover of Wrestling News number 41, which will come out in time, I assure you. And then closing the slides from color photos in issue 40. And then see, it goes a little out of order here, but here's March 28th, 77 from Pat Malone. Dear Norman, enclosed find the check for the amount of $400 balance due on issue 40. I would like very much in the future, Norman, if you would let me know who you are using on the front and back cover. As I sell most of the magazines in this territory, if I don't get a picture on the front and back cover of someone from East Tennessee, I can't sell the books over there. Let me know at once when to expect the books. Thank you, Pat Malone. That's a little terse. But if I go a little bit forward here, this is where I said they're a little out of order. Here's a letter from Pat Malone to Norm Keitzer, May 25th, 1977.
Oh.
Dear Norman, I received the magazines. I will send you a check in a few days for at least half of them. I'm going to tell you something. I guess Miss Christine told you. Don't use anything more of Nick Gula's boys. And what, I think he means end, it says R, but there's a lot of misspellings here. And what Scott Teal sends you, as we don't work together anymore. But be sure and always have some good pictures of the East Tennessee boys, which is Fuller's, on the front and back cover. Also Jerry Jarrett's boys.
Can I give some insight on that?
Yeah, please.
Also, because when he said we don't work with Nick anymore, don't use it. Scott Teal, unfortunately, was the suffering for that because Scott had moved to Nashville from Florida in the early 70s and had been doing the Slamagram programs for Nick and taking pictures of Nick's guys in the Nashville end, while Mike Shields did a lot of stuff for Memphis, as I said. And when Jarrett split off from Goulas, it became the Jarrett Welch Wrestling Company, because even though Roy died right about that time anyway, did he not? But
Yeah.
Buddy Fuller, who was Edward Welch, had agreed to partner with Jarrett so that Jarrett could use the Welch name. And, Buddy had kind of taken over at that point the head of the family status, since Roy was in ill health and the other brothers had retired. And so from Goulas Welch Wrestling, it became the Jarrett Welch Wrestling Company because Buddy Fuller was involved. And obviously, since Buddy's son, Ron, owned the Knoxville territory, Jarrett and Ron were working together, bopping talent back and forth, because it was all in the family, and neither one of them was particularly beholden to or, enamored of Nick. So Nick was in the middle in Nashville, but the Memphis on the west end and Knoxville on the east end was trying to squeeze him, and also didn't want his boys to get any publicity in the magazine.
And Scott Teal had a good relationship with Jerry Lawler, and Jerry Lawler secretly had Scott Teal do the programs when they first broke off, and then Jarrett put the kibosh on that because Scott had the long time. Scott Teal's the one person who doesn't say a single bad word about Nick Goulas. Said he was always honorable with him, always treated him good.
No, Michael St. John will not say anything bad about Nick too, because he did the same thing. Nick treated him like he was his TV announcer. Nick, usually try to take care of the people in the inner circle in the office, but the opinion amongst the wrestlers varied. But as a matter of fact, Michael St. John said, "I'll tell you this one. I can't remember what it was, but he came on a point where St. John, maybe his wife sick? He told me the story." But he just happened to mention it, and Nick got in his safe and gave him some large amount of money in cash and said, "Yeah, boy, don't worry about it." But that's the thing. Nick, he was still planning on being in business, forever, because he'd done that for 40 years. Why wouldn't he do it forever? He had a new office building built in Nashville after the split with Jarrett and paid cash for it, like $200,000. I'm talking cash that he had in his fucking safe in his old office. The old time wrestling promoters, they kept ludicrous amounts of cash around.
Well, back to this letter. This will be the final letter of this edition of From the Files. Enclosed, you will find a program from Memphis and Louisville. You can see the boys we use in Jerry Jarrett's towns. I suppose you get material from East Tennessee of the boys who work for Fuller. Thanking you, I will close. Sincerely yours, Pat Malone.
Yeah, thanking you, I will close was not a sign-off that Pat would come up with on his own.
Oh my God, it has it here too. Here's the next letter, June 8th. Thanking you, I will close.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
Pat's favorite expression was, "Boy, I'll either fight you, fuck you, or run you a foot race."
Who took this photo of Paul Orndorff? I'm sending you a couple of programs. You will see
Orndorff in front of a white concrete wall. Either he's got the old Southern Junior Heavyweight title belt on, or perhaps he's in either short trunks or blue warm-up pants.
It doesn't have the photo here, but it says, I'm sending you a couple of programs. You will see a story on Paul Orndorff, all in caps. I would like for to use it in the magazine with the negative. I hope you have received by now. I would like for you to use the picture of Orndorff on the front cover, along with Fuller. And every time the word end is supposed to be here, it says R. Almost like a pirate. So Fuller, R someone from the East Tennessee side. Be sure and have them on the cover. Let me hear from you. Thanking you, I will close. That is my new favorite sign-off. Thanking you, I will close. But we will close there with this. Obviously, this is a massive file. This is 77, and it goes until... I didn't realize he was still doing stuff. 86?
Yeah.
87? 88? So it goes until 1988, and here is...
I think that's the year he died.
And here's his obituary from the paper.
Oh, my God.
March 15th.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, well, you and I off the air got to do some business. You'll get your files will get a big plug in what I'm producing, but I need that information. But go ahead.
Well, here's March 15th, 1988. Do you know his real name? Because I'm about to say it.
Well, Edgar B. Davies is the consensus of what most people think his real name was.
Here it says Edgar Brian Davey, 87, a retired professional wrestler who used the professional name of Pat O'Brien, died Tuesday at Southern Hills Hospital after a brief illness. Davey, who wrestled in Nashville for several years wearing a mask and using the name The Green Shadow, won the title of World Light Heavyweight Wrestling Champion in 1936. Funeral services, it goes into the information there. A native of Carbondale, Illinois, Mr. Davey was the son of the late Mr. and Mrs. Charles Davey.
Good Lord.
He first came to this area in the early 1930s and wrestled at the old Hippodrome, drawing turnaway crowds. He had wrestled in New York City and other cities in this country and around the world. Later, he promoted wrestling in Miami and South Florida. After his retirement, about 20 years
And by the way, that was in the 40s between 1945 and 44 and 47.
Oh, no way. Wow.
Roy Welch had taken over Tampa.
Yeah.
And Lake Mary or Lake Worth, a lot of towns in Florida. Florida wrestling was on its ass and not drawing. This was before Cowboy Luttrell. And at various points, he sent Pat down there not only to wrestle as the Green Shadow, but to run towns and book for him. And even sent Nick down for a year out of Nashville. And it was too far away. It didn't work. And so they came back because Nashville and Tennessee was making more money. But they were the promoters in Florida, for most of Florida, right after World War II, right before Luttrell.
After his retirement about 20 years ago, Mr. Davey continued to stay close to the sports world. In recent years, he had worked as a guard at the sports arena at the state fairgrounds. Survivors include a daughter, Patsy Davey, Nashville, 3 sons, Clyde Davey, Tampa, Edgar Davey, Nashville, and Patrick Davey, Alexandria, Virginia, 18 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. So there it is. It doesn't say which paper this is from, but I'm sure it's in that.
By the way, he did fill-in matches every once in a while in the early 1960s when he was past 60, and he was still taking Ginger the Bear around in the 60s and I think to the early 70s. He was fucking amazing. He had the legendary stories, but nobody got more heat than the Green Shadow. As far as with the fans, there are numerous instances of the fans rioted. The fans tried to pull the Green Shadow out of the locker room. Green Shadow was hit over the head with a broken bottle and slashed in the face. He was stabbed. He had a fight he was arrested for kicking the shit out of a fan. Everywhere he fucking went. And there's no video. There's no film. There was no such thing as television. There's no audio recordings. There's very few pictures. But he was inventing all of he and Roy Welch inventing or the first one to do all of the fucking heel wrestling tricks that have come to be blasé in front of these people. They'd never seen him. Of soap in the eyes, we're going to lynch this motherfucker. So he was the fucking saltiest old son of a bitch that ever walked the earth.
Here's a letter from Pat Malone. Again, very nice handwriting. I'm guessing it's his wife. This is all handwritten, informing Norm Keitzer of falling and breaking his right hip on March 30th. We'll end with this. I just bumped into this.
There was one time he was in the hospital in the 70s, and Teenie got mad because she had called up and she had asked for Pat Malone's room. And, I'm sorry, Edgar Davey. And so why does he have 2 names? It's a professional name. She was like, she didn't want anybody to think anything about wrestling was, phony or whatever. It's a professional name. Go ahead.
Well, we'll end with this. This is in the file. This is dated January 10th, 1987. It's signed sincerely Christine Jarrett. Handwritten. Dear Norman, please believe me when I say that my grandson, Jeff Jarrett, is #1 box office. It is not just from a grandmother talking. Whenever you see fit to put his pictures on the front page, you can automatically send me 700 magazines first shipment. Hope you are well, and I wish
trying to bribe Jeff's way on the cover of the magazine.
And I wish for you all great things in the new year. Signed, sincerely, Christine Jarrett. That's the whole letter. Believe me when I say he's #1. Yeah. Put him on the cover. I'll buy 700 copies. Well, you never know what you'll find in the Pat Malone file. This has been From the Files, Pat Malone. And, boy, we went a while, but we had a good time. But let's now wrap things up with